to 60.
Wendy's new breakfast 2 for $3 Biggie Bundles lets you choose from your fave 4, including a sausage or egg and cheese biscuit, small seasoned potatoes, or medium hot coffee. Limited time only during breakfast hours. U.S. price and participation may vary. Not valid in a combo. Single item at regular price.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Chargers get their first win of the season. They win by 4 at Minnesota. A monster game for wide receiver Keenan Allen and quarterback Justin Herbert. 18 catches for 215 yards for Allen. He also threw a 49-yard touchdown pass to wide receiver Mike Williams. Herbert was 40 of 47 for 405 yards and 3 TDs. The Rams are at Cincinnati tonight, 5:15 kickoff on ESPN. This could be an interesting week for USC coach Lincoln Riley. The Trojans play at Colorado Saturday morning. The previous 2 coaches who went up against Colorado coach Deion Sanders, Oregon's Dan Lanning, and Jay Norvell of Colorado State, both of them took time to do some trash talking aimed at Sanders. We'll keep tabs on Riley this week to see if he does the same thing. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
On Monday, October 9th, don't miss the KBLA Talk 1580 exclusive. The tape. 1 year later.
Y'all were coming for us.
Yeah, but Tavis, that's not in my heart. I wasn't coming for anyone like that. I apologize, but that was not me. That's not in my heart. And like I said a few moments ago, I have a solid, demonstrable record of shared power that's real and concrete. That can't be misinterpreted.
Join Tavis Smiley and an all-star panel of political insiders, influencers, and journalists for a look back at the crisis that shook LA City Hall when 4 Latino leaders were caught on tape making racist, demeaning, and derogatory statements about black people and other fellow citizens. On Monday, October 9th, exclusively on KBLA Talk 1580, The Tape. 1 year later. We're broadcast live in Afternoon Drive from 5 to 7 p.m. with an immediate encore presentation from 7 to 9 p.m. When all was said and done, was more said than done. 1 year later. Are there fractures in LA's black-brown political partnership? And where do we go from here? Don't miss The Tape. 1 year later. Only on KBLA Talk 1580. Monday, October 9th. Live from 5 to 7 p.m. with an immediate encore presentation from 7 to 9 p.m. We've got a lot to talk about.
Smooth sounds of one Billy Preston. Nothing from nothing leaves nothing. So glad to have you tuned into our program. I'm Tavis Smiley. We are in hour 2 and delighted to have you with us in this hour. And in this hour, our conversation more expressly, we tapped into some of this with Katrina Vanden Heuvel from The Nation magazine in our first hour. Kind of went around the edges, but I want to go right to the middle, the sweet spot, the epicenter, if you will, of this conversation about the UAW strike and the history of U.S. labor movements, with an emphasis on the connection to Southern labor and to civil rights. I am honored to have in this conversation a distinguished scholar in African American and labor history, Dr. Michael Honey. He's written more than two, but certainly 2 powerful books that I think will be relevant in this conversation in this hour. One was called Going Down Jericho Road, The Memphis Strike, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Last Campaign, and To the Promised Land, Martin Luther King and the Fight for Economic Justice. So he knows of what he speaks and what he teaches, and I am honored to have Dr. Michael Honey on this program. Dr. Honey, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. I'm good. Great to talk to you.
No, it's good to have you on. Thank you for your time. Glad we have an hour to sort of to unpack this. Let me just start with a couple of broad questions, and then we'll narrow as we move through this hour. When you look at this summer of strikes, and the summer is basically over, so I'll call it this season of strikes that we have been in. Broadly speaking, how do you see this this moment historically? These strikes, we just talked again about the fact that the Hollywood strike, at least on the Writers Guild side, seems to be coming to an end with a tentative agreement reached last night. The actors are still out. UAW is expanding its strikes. President Biden, in case you've just tuned in, didn't hear this, has announced he'll be on the picket line historically with auto workers tomorrow in Detroit. So all that said, Dr. Honey, how do you see this present moment historically when it comes to labor and strikes?
Well, it's a great moment of departure, really, ever since, well, really in my lifetime, since the Reagan era of the 1980s that you were just talking about and his speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Reagan set off a counteroffensive against organized labor that really smashed a lot of the unions, and then in the 1990s, in addition, the globalization idea that was so popular among the American, I guess I'll call them the ruling class, the people with the power, the 1%. Whereas unions used to represent about 35% of the workers in the 1950s, now it's down to about 6% of the workers in the United States are in unions, which is ridiculous and shameful and completely in contrast to other developed capitalist countries where workers have much more power. And a lot of it's because the labor laws in the United States are almost useless. The Biden administration is trying to make the NLRB be a more functional thing that really does help workers. But the laws themselves have been eviscerated. And all of this goes back to what my colleague Michael Goldfield calls the Southern Key, which is the resurgence of Southern power, sort of the renewed Confederacy, if you will, after World War II, at a moment, when things could have. It was after a big anti-fascist war, and it was the 1940s was the seed time for the civil rights movement as well as the labor movement. But through the Republican Party and conservative Democrats, we ended up with the Taft-Hartley Act, which in 1947, which really stripped unions of power, and then the purges of the unions in the 1949, which eliminated some of the almost 1 million members with the strongest civil rights platforms. And so from there on, it's been a losing battle. What's happened now is that through various rank-and-file movements, the unions are being reinvigorated. So we wouldn't be seeing this UAW strike if it hadn't been for years and years of work by rank-and-file people trying to democratize the UAW, which before was run by a caucus led by the president of the union and made a lot of bad deals for the workers, and the worst of them being in 2007 and 8.
Yeah.
So that's what they're fighting against. They're trying to turn the tide.
Yeah.
And this has happened in the Teamsters, and it's happening among hospital workers. It's happening in Los Angeles, in your area, with the hotel and restaurant workers. People are rising up, and it's the 99% versus the 1%, as people once were saying.
People are rising up, and I think that's a good thing, and we'll talk about that as we move through this hour. But when we come forward, I want to come directly to the 2 points you made a moment ago that I think are worth interrogating. That is why it is, and I've got my own thoughts, but you're the expert here. Why is it the case in the richest nation in the history of the world that workers have so little power as compared to the power that workers have in other nation states, number one? Number two, why is it the case, and to my earlier point, the richest nation in the history of the world, that our laws are so anti-labor? That may be the answer, but we'll talk about it. Why are our laws so anti-labor, and why do workers in this power, relatively speaking, have so little power as compared to workers in other nations? Just getting started in this hour as we drill a little bit deeper into this season, this summer of strikes. and make some broader connections to labor movements writ large and to civil rights. We'll get to Dr. King, one of my favorite subjects, of course, and a great deal more as we move through this hour with Dr. Michael Honey on Tavis Smiley.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Escalade IQ. This the intro to the all-electric Cadillac perfected like Zoom. And on a full charge, you get 450 miles without the stop. Haiku. This is what I do. Daddy fat intellect since 92. Linked all the way back, panoramic roof. Come with 24-inch rim standard. Ooh, why? Shout it, don't kill him. Cadillac diamond in the back, cold chillin'. And when I'm on attack, on the track is no ceiling. Sky's the limit. You hear me? You hear me? Straight drop, no parachutes. Lay lines like a longitude and latitude. Feel it, beloved, clearly we're hustling. Bussin', truckin'. Cadillac, Cadillac, Cadillac.
For more on the Escalade IQ, visit Cadillac.com.
Available late 2024. GM estimate 450-mile range on a full charge based on development testing and/or analytical projection. Consistent with SCHA 1634 revision 2017 MCT. Range subject to change prior to production. Annual rates may vary based on service factors, including ambience temperature, terrain, battery age, and condition loading, and how you use and maintain your vehicle.
Applications are now being accepted for the City of Los Angeles Emergency Renters Assistance Program. The program provides up to 6 months of rental arrears to low-income residential renters who are at risk of homelessness due to unpaid rent as a result of COVID-19 or other financial hardship. Applications will not be accepted after 6 p.m. on October 2nd, 2023. Go online 24/7 at housing.lacity.org or call 888-379-3150 from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday and see if you qualify. Apply today.
What's up? I'm Danelle Riley, FAMU alumni and creator of the HBCU Culture Shop. I am so proud of my new partnership with Black Beyond Measure and Target. They help me elevate community pride with my HBCU designs and continue to support Black creators and entrepreneurs with Target HBCU challenges, scholarship programs, and campus collaborations. Let's come together this homecoming season and beyond. Shop my brand and discover other Black-owned products at target.com/blackbeyondmeasure.
In Big Tobacco's Fantasyland, children are the future. Here, tobacco companies are committed to higher education, offering scholarships to students who submit essays about the benefits of vaping. The tobacco industry even sponsors summer camps for kids. Don't worry, the tobacco-sponsored programs have been linked to leaving your kids more interested in smoking. In Big Tobacco's Fantasyland, the world's deadliest industry is your child's friend.
See reality at undo.org.
Be ready for extreme heat in your area. On days when extreme heat is expected, take action to keep your home as cool as possible. Set your air conditioner to 78 degrees. If AC isn't available, close blinds and curtains on all windows and run fans counterclockwise. Or find your nearest cooling center. Transportation help may be available. Learn more at heatreadyca.com. Brought to you by the state of California.
He's rooting for everybody black. Everybody black. More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
More of Dr. Michael Honey coming your way right now, distinguished scholar in African American and labor history, joining us this hour to talk about this UAW strike and all these other strikes that are taking place right now, others that are in the offing, but just trying to get a historical context for the moment that we find ourselves in right now beyond what specifically is happening with the UAW or any of these other strikes. But in case, again, you've not heard, President Biden has announced he will be on the picket line tomorrow in Detroit with these striking auto workers. I keep saying historic. It is, Dr. Michael Honey, but let me ask you to frame how you see a sitting U.S. president in Detroit tomorrow on the picket line with striking auto workers.
Well, it's a great gesture on Biden's part. The president has been saying he's the most pro-labor president in history. That might be true, but how do you put teeth into that? Mm-hmm. You know, you can be in favor of unions, but how do you actually win? How do you win some of these situations? And you were saying before the break, why is the U.S. so backward on labor issues compared to other countries? It's two things. One, it's the politics in which the political system really is controlled by the 1% for the most part, and also the neo-Confederate people of the South, which is now spread to the Midwest and the West, who block any kind of change that would be good for working people. And then secondly, you have a media system for the most part that doesn't pay attention to those issues. And so the political and economic and media superstructure really goes against organized labor. And yet, as Dr. King would say, being organized is the key to everything for workers and for African Americans and other people. And just for a moment, I'd like to go back to something King said in 1961. He gave a speech to the AFL-CIO when the unions were strong, and he made a warning. He said, "A crisis confronts us both, whether it's the ultra-right wing in the form of John Birch societies or the alliance which former President Eisenhower denounced of the military and big business, or the coalition of Southern Dixiecrats and Northern reactionaries. In whatever form, these menaces now threaten everything decent and fair in American life. Labor today faces a grave crisis in the next 20 years, and of course it's been beyond that since 61. This period is made to order for those who would seek to drive labor into impotency." And that has happened. It's not impotent. We're finding now that labor is not impotent.
Well, that's why King was prophetic. I remind folk all the time he was not a politician. He wasn't just a personality. He was a prophet. And in so many ways, King predicted much of what we be dealing with today. And that's why I always say to people that I grade all politicians on what I call a Kingian scorecard. My Kingian scorecard is where do you stand on poverty, on racism, and on militarism. That, of course, trifecta is the triple threat that King talked about that would threaten our democracy for years to come: poverty, racism, and militarism, and we could certainly add to that a number of things these days. But I love, again, that quote that you shared from Dr. King, because it speaks to, again, the ways in which King was no mere mortal. King was, in many respects, a prophet. That said, let me just ask you, in this contemporary moment, even as you understand the history better than most of the U.S. labor movement in this country, how in this contemporary moment would you define or describe labor politics? Talk to me about the politics of labor right now.
I think we're seeing a kind of a breakthrough. I hope that's what we're seeing among hospital workers, hotel and restaurant workers, graduate students. You had one of the biggest, probably the biggest strike of graduate students in history in California last year, and it's spreading beyond what people think of as the old working class. What King said in 1962, he talked about the 1% of the population controlling most of the wealth, and this has been something that's been really, it's a shame that he talked about the superfluous wealth of people that have so much money that they're gagging on it. People with $150 billion in assets like Elon Musk, who are completely anti-union. And so, that does not represent your average working class person. And your average working class person could be like me, a college professor, or it could be somebody working in the hotels. It's a lot of us who are in that 90% of the population that need organization, and unions aren't all that we need, but unions are crucial. And so having such a low rate of unionization in the United States, and especially in the South, that's one of the things that's holding us back. So we're having a moment where we think, maybe things are going to shift now.
I asked you earlier, I said I wanted to ask you, you went ahead and responded. I'm glad you did, about why our laws in this country are so anti-union. And the short answer, to paraphrase what you said, to put in my own language what you said, is that Washington is bought and bossed by big money and big business. That's the answer. Our laws are anti-union because Washington is bossed and bought by big money and big business. The other question I want to get to that I posed earlier, though, and they're not disconnected, but I want to just give you a chance to drill down on it, which is why workers in this country have so little power as compared to workers in other nations.
I think there's a number of big reasons for that. One is the sort of mythology of the United States that everybody can do well as an individual instead of as a group, as part of an organization. And that's part of the American mythology, and a lot of people buy into that. A second thing is racism, that this has been used to split working class people since the days of slavery. And we're struggling with that. W.E.B. Du Bois talked about it, that after the Civil War, we needed to reconstruct the South by a labor movement that was interracial. He was very tuned in to the labor movement when he was writing Black Reconstruction in the 1930s. And that's still a lot of the equation, where, and we're seeing it, with gun violence and racial intimidation and police brutality, all of those things down the line. The working class in this country is multiracial, multi-ethnic. It's women and men. It's gay and straight. We need to be organized as a group with some identity of that. And racism and sexism and these other isms really undermine that significantly in the United States.
Yep. Tell me more. I'm fascinated now. This is getting good to me. Take me inside your classroom. I know you teach this stuff, of course, every day. And I'm not asking for anything in particular. I just want to learn right quick, as does the audience. Tell me more. Give me a bit more about the intersection historically in this country of race and labor. Take me to that intersection and just tell me something that I don't know.
Well, you probably do know, but it's, throughout the history of this country, particularly I'll go to the period after the Civil War, there have been efforts to unite workers across racial lines, and women and men, and to people to think of themselves as working people who have their interests in common around class. And of course, the 1% people that tend to run the society go totally against that. And so we've always had that struggle that we're running upstream, even though the majority of the people are working people. As King said, the interests of the black community and the labor community should be the same. They are the same. But actually, in the history of unions, a lot of unions were used to keep black people out of jobs. So, if you split the workers along racial lines, then you can really weaken the whole struggle for economic and social justice. I'm from Michigan originally, and, we saw this a lot in Detroit, where my parents and grandparents are from, where black and white workers had all these interests in common, but we had race riots, and 1943, the worst white race riot almost in our history. And it was around people getting separated and conflicting and competing groups instead of working together. And that's what racism does. It sets white folks up to think that somehow they're better than other people, and they're not going to organize together with those other people. In fact, they're going to organize to keep them out. And I think that's breaking down now. As Nelson Lichtenstein, the labor historian, said yesterday, that the working class today in the United States is not the white male worker that we used to think of, as this is the union worker. It's a white male. No longer.
Yeah.
The working class is multiracial. Women are very much in the leadership. You see that in this UAW strike, and you see it in the other strikes, that it's much more representative of the working class, I think, than what we've seen before.
You mentioned earlier in this dialogue media, the role of media in this process, of this notion rather of U.S. labor, and I'm curious as to what your indictment is of my profession. I want to know why you link those two things, but I sense that there's an indictment of the role that media has played in this labor movement.
Well, pretty much anything that it's in my lifetime, which is since 1947, I tune into radio programs like yours, or reading documented newspapers, magazines, like The Nation, like you just had Katrina Vanden Heuvel. But most people don't. And in fact, large numbers of people have no idea what's going on. And then you have the Fox News phenomenon covering about maybe a third of the population of people who watch the television, who are just misinformed day after day. And it's become a real poison. And so, that media structure also has to be changed, and I don't know the answer to that. You have a better idea than I do.
No, I just wanted to get your take on it since you mentioned it. You used the phrase earlier in this dialogue, and I want to talk more about King when we come forward here moments from now. But you mentioned this moment that we are in, this summer of strikes, this season of strikes, as a moment of departure. That was your phrase, a moment of departure. I'm wondering if you really see it, as a moment of departure, and if so, what you mean by that specifically, or whether or not it's an outlier moment, and it may be that it's too soon to tell, but there is evidence that suggests that we may be in a moment of departure. But again, at this stage, it may be best to call it an outlier. But you tell me.
Well, that's like predicting the future, which who knows? I wish I knew. None of us know that. It's like the whole election cycle that we're in, where things could go way better or they could go way worse. So I really wouldn't predict, except that one thing I would say about the departure is that if you take a major union like the United Auto Workers Union that was 2 years ago caught up in corruption scandals and sort of taken over by the courts for a while, and there's a democratic movement within the union over years and years. Finally, you end up with a union leadership that represents more of how the workers in that industry really feel. And the black women as part of the leadership, it is a different moment for the UAW. Now, that doesn't mean that's true for all the unions, but I think you can see that happening in many different industries. To me, that's a departure.
Yeah. Are there ways in which historically, when we see moments like these, where unions flex, Dr. King used to always say that a man can only ride your back when it's bent, and when you straighten up your back, you're going somewhere. Historically, in moments like these, where we see unions, we see workers stand up, does it have a residual effect? Put another way, does it catch on?
Well, let's hope so. That we've had some periods of upsurge since the economic crisis of 2007 and 2008, where we had the Occupy movement. We've had student organizing at University of Washington and other campuses. I think it has legs. What's going on isn't happening on its own. It's part of a general, and especially among younger people.
Yeah,
I think that the things that are facing us today and facing young people especially about the global crisis that we're in, and having these politicians like in the Republican Party who have no intention of fixing anything. They're more into holding things as they have been.
As they have been, yeah. Status quo. That's always the problem, that you can't get people off of the status quo and trying to advance our politics and be more progressive in their thinking. When we come forward with Dr. Michael Honey, I'm going to go straight inside these two books that I'm fascinated to interrogate. Going Down Jericho Road, The Memphis Strike, Martin Luther King's Last Campaign, and To the Promised Land, Martin Luther King and the Fight for Economic Justice. You're listening to Michael Honey on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
I'm Ray Harris, and here's the latest from the Black Information Network.
It's been very rough, and this wind here is killing me. I mean, I think it's a 20-mile-an-hour wind.
Post-tropical cyclone Ophelia continues to weaken and move offshore after dumping heavy rain from North Carolina to New Jersey.
Thousands of homes and businesses still in the dark after winds of up to 70 miles an hour damaged power lines.
Forecasters say the system produced rainfall across portions of the mid-Atlantic to southern New England over the weekend.
And so I decided to come and visit with you today.
Vice President Kamala Harris will visit Atlanta, Georgia this week as part of her Fight for Our Freedoms initiative. Administrative officials say Harris will meet and engage with students at historically black colleges and universities, including Morehouse, Spelman, Clark Atlanta, and Morris Brown. And that's the latest. I'm Ray Harris on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
Seeing troubles working in Diamond Bar. It's going to be a broken down vehicle in Glendale and a collision for downtown. Taking that 10 west at Hoover. Looks like that left lane is blocked. The 110 north from Florence up to the 10, things are busy. Stalled vehicle in Gardena on the 110 south at El Segundo Boulevard. That's on the right shoulder. Glendale, somebody broke it down on the 134 east as you get towards the 2. Looks like they're in the center divider. And try to clear troubles in Diamond Bar. It's a wreck on the 57 south at Pathfinder. That has slowed us as far back as the 60s.
Wendy's new breakfast 2 for $3 Biggie Bundles lets you choose from your fave 4, including a sausage or egg and cheese biscuit, small seasoned potatoes, or medium hot coffee. Limited time only during breakfast hours. U.S. price and participation may vary. Not valid in a combo. Single item at regular price.
Hey, if you're thinking of getting the latest iPhone, you need to stop and check out the insane, amazing wireless offer from Boost Infinite. To learn all about it, just pick up your phone, dial pound 250, and say Boost Infinite. You'll have the option to receive a one-time auto-dialed text message from iHeartMedia.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man. The Chargers get their first win of the season. They win by 4 at Minnesota. A monster game for wide receiver Keenan Allen and quarterback Justin Herbert. 18 catches for 215 yards for Allen. He also threw a 49-yard touchdown pass to wide receiver Mike Williams. Herbert was 40 of 47 for 405 yards and 3 TDs. The Rams are at Cincinnati tonight. 5:15 kickoff on ESPN. This could be an interesting week for USC coach Lincoln Riley. The Trojans play at Colorado Saturday morning. The previous 2 coaches who went up against Colorado coach Deion Sanders, Oregon's Dan Lanning, and Jay Norvell of Colorado State, both of them took time to do some trash talking aimed at Sanders. We'll keep tabs on Riley this week to see if he does the same thing. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Race, culture wars, political turf battles, criminal justice and injustice, the courts. These are the conversations you won't hear elsewhere. My guests are leading journalists, celebrities, and sports figures, elected leaders, and influencers. They aren't afraid to get into it and say the quiet part out loud. With Ariva Martin in real time, your commute just became the most engaging part of your day. Tune in weekdays from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. or find us on YouTube. Ariva Martin in real time, when you want it straight, no chaser.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
For all of us, this generation and the next, there is simply no place in our lives for litter. And yet, it's everywhere we look. And unfortunately, it does belong to all of us. So, let's come together and create a litter-free, clean California, once and for all. Remember to properly dispose of your trash and recycling. Secure truckloads with tarps to keep debris from flying out. Clean out your car when you're at a gas station. Take pride in your community by organizing a cleanup event or join a cleanup event near you. Zero litter is the goal. Join us at cleanca.com. That's cleanca.com. Let's do it together. Brought to you by Caltrans. cleanca.com.
More honesty than you can handle. More empowerment than you can imagine. You're tuned in to Tavis Smiley.
Our guest is Dr. Michael Honey. He is a distinguished scholar in African American and labor history, and we have him on this hour, I should say. Have had him on for the first 30 minutes. 30 minutes more to go here, talking about the history of U.S. labor and the emphasis it has to Southern labor and civil rights. And it seems to me that one cannot talk about the labor movement in this country, certainly where black folk are concerned, without talking specifically about a guy named Martin Luther King Jr. And so I love your text, Going Down Jericho Road, the Memphis Strike, Martin Luther King's last campaign. And let me just ask you, again, some broad questions. I can narrow it once you start to unpack this for me. And that is what some of the takeaways are for you in your text, Go Down Jericho Road, about King and the Memphis Strike all these years ago.
Well, we were talking a little while ago about a moment of departure,
Mm-hmm.
and I think 1968 was that, and it was a departure in some really bad ways. Killing of King and Robert Kennedy and the election of Richard Nixon, things really turned for the worse, which was worse than we probably could have expected, and the Vietnam War escalated instead of somebody trying to bring it to an end. But if I go back for a minute with King, I've got a book that people might like also called All Labor Has Dignity. It's the book of King's labor speeches. And until I found these speeches at the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta, I didn't know there were labor speeches by King. And I found this huge cage of speeches that he had given to all kinds of unions across the country, but especially to the ones that had a strong civil rights program. So I put those speeches together, and recently the International Labor Organization bought 300 copies of them from Beacon Press, and they're giving them out to people around the world. But Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio, has also been giving them out in Congress, and I've been speaking to his congressional interns and so forth. And the real thread in that book that I like is for people to understand King in a larger dimension. It used to be people would just say he was a civil rights leader. Well, we've kind of gone beyond that. Mm-hmm. I think people see him more as a human rights leader now. But oftentimes they don't talk about the labor issues. So, for instance, there's a new book on King that's a fabulous book. It's 600 and some pages. It says almost nothing about labor. And yet, King was a real ally to the unions, and the Martin Luther King Day events are honored by unions, but also the April 4th date when King was killed. And there's a reason. He, in 1965, talked about the need to go to the second phase of the civil rights movement, the first phase being the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. But he said, now we need to go to phase 2, which is to economic equality. And in some of these speeches to unions, he talked about two Americas, one of the rich and the well-off, and the other poor people on a lonely island of poverty, including people who work, the working poor. And so that's what he was doing in Memphis. He was talking not only about poor people without jobs, but people who had jobs but were living in poverty. Most of the sanitation workers actually not most, but half of them were on welfare because they didn't make enough money to live, even though they were working 60-hour weeks. And so when he came to Memphis, he was fulfilling a promise to organize workers across the board, and he was, as part of his Poor People's Campaign, people said, "Oh, you really can't go to Memphis. You'll get caught up in another battle, and it'll undermine the Poor People's Campaign." He said, "How can I not go to Memphis? This is the working poor taking up the struggle themselves. I have to go to Memphis to support them." And so then, the rest of it is history, as they say. But we have to remember, with the tragedy of King being killed in Memphis, that without King, they would have, I'm sure, lost that strike. And he put himself on the line that way for working people and poor people all the time. And he could have been killed in some other terrain. In these last two speeches, March 18th, when he first came to Memphis, and April 3rd, the night before he was killed, he sort of left an agenda for us that, first of all, the issue is not only racism, but it's economic equality, that we have to build a movement that is inclusive, that changes the American landscape so that working people, and especially black people and other people of color, can have efficacy. He says we can all get more together than we can apart. We can get more organized together than we can apart. This is the way we gain power. What is power? Walter Reuther said once that power is the ability of a labor union like the UAW to make the most powerful corporation in the world, General Motors, say yes when it wants to say no.
No.
So this was, his King's legacy is not only all the human rights issues, but also the labor rights issues.
I'm so glad you pointed that out, and I'm so glad that text of yours I do not have, so I got to get a copy of it myself. The text of King's labor speeches that I don't have in my library, so I'll make sure I get a copy of that. But that said, I've always been fascinated. And I'm curious to get your take on this. I've always been fascinated by how connected, how empathic King was when it came to workers and laborers, even though he came from a upper middle class background. He knew nothing of poverty growing up. That's not the world he grew up in. And yet it's rare that people who, and I wouldn't say King was born with a silver spoon in his mouth per se, but it's rare that people that grow up in those kinds of environments can end up being as empathetic and as connected to everyday people as King was on the labor front. How do you read that?
I think it's really part of his heritage. It's part of the black social gospel that King followed. Benjamin Mays at Morehouse College, where King went to school. His father, who was a sharecropper's son, who went to Atlanta with nothing in his pocket and ended up, developing a large black church. King's great-grandfather was a slave, and he came from that Southern slavery and economic injustice, Jim Crow framework. And even though he grew up in what we'd call a middle-class household, that area around where his home is, I think even if you go today, I haven't been there for a while, but it's mostly not, it's pretty poor, and it was really poor in the 1930s.
Yeah.
So even though his family was doing all right, he could see day to day that other people were not doing all right.
You're right about that. And Auburn Ave, you've not been there a while, but Auburn Ave is on the come up. I mean, there are gentrification is real in Atlanta and everywhere else these days. So it's not exactly the way it looked when King was there, but I take your point about that. You're absolutely correct. Our guest is Dr. Michael Honey. More when we come forward in this conversation about the fight for economic justice, specifically King, at the moment at least, and the fight for economic justice. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
If you're a veteran with a service-connected disability that is directly impacting your ability to work, resources are available to help you find employment. VA's Veteran Readiness and Employment, or VR&E, can assist you with finding a job that uses your existing skills. Or, if you're interested in exploring a new field, a VR&E counselor can help you determine the right education or training options for a new career. Find out if VR&E is right for you by visiting va.gov/VRE today.
My mom has decided to learn to paint, and she's good.
My dad's now into creative cuisine, and I've already put on 6 pounds.
Learning new things comes with age.
My mom, she started forgetting my name and what we're talking about.
Forgetting well-known things doesn't. Memory loss may be a sign of Alzheimer's disease. Early detection gives you and your loved one time to plan for the future. Learn the warning signs of Alzheimer's at 10signs.org. Brought to you by the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
1 in 4 Americans today are living with a disability. I'm one of them. People with disabilities are extremely talented, resilient problem solvers that have so much to offer. And we've got a trusted ally on our side, an organization we can rely on, Easter Seals. Easter Seals is leading the way to full equity, inclusion, and access to healthcare, employment, and education for people with disabilities, families, and communities. That's my Easter Seals. Make it yours.
Learn more and get involved at easterseals.com.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like Sprinklers in the Rain and Leaky Faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Drip.
Anyone can choose to make a difference. You can help people succeed, rebuild after disasters, protect the environment, or feed the hungry. Not only will you make a difference for others, but for yourself. You can earn money for college, learn career skills, and make friendships that last a lifetime. Make a difference. Choose your future. Choose AmeriCorps.
Helping to make you the most knowledgeable person in your circle of friends. This is Tavis Smiley.
Michael Honey, let me just ask you how you would define. I've written a book about Dr. King, as this audience knows, a book called "Death of a King," specifically that is, if I can say it, about the last year in his life, from April 4, '67, when he gives that speech, the Beyond Vietnam speech at Riverside Church, to April 4, '68, when they kill him in Memphis. So the book focuses just on the last year. But I'm wondering how you would describe or define King's journey on this fight for economic justice. That's not where he started. It's where he ended, but not where he started. How would you define his journey?
Well, that's why I chose that title, Going Down Jericho Road, for the book about Memphis, that King often referred to the person going down Jericho Road who was besieged by danger on all sides, the Good Samaritan, who was of a different race, so, different group than the dominant group, and the person by the side of the road was part of the dominant group, but he stopped anyway to save this person's life. Other people just passed by. And he used that story, that parable, all the time, and it was one of the things he said in his very last speech in Memphis on April 3rd, that people have to, and this is the social gospel at work, that people put themselves in a position where they're doing something for somebody else, and that becomes more important maybe than doing something for yourself even.
Yes.
And so in that speech, he gave an impromptu speech at 11 o'clock at night on April 3rd. He said, let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. And if you just take that one idea, dangerous unselfishness, and King's life and how he applied that, you get the whole story about what it's about and what he thought a good life was, even if your life might be shortened by that. And that's really, that message is something that if people would pick it up seriously in the United States today, I think we'd see things start to move in a way better direction.
No, that is the phrase for the day, a dangerous unselfishness. Every one of us should be engaged in a dangerous unselfishness in the lives that we're living and the legacies that we are living. Our remaining moments with Dr. Michael Honey when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
From Leimert Park with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
What's up, party people? It's your favorite MC's favorite rapper, MC Light here. And we're celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, authentically powered by Cadillac. And we're going to take it way back to where it started. It was only fitting that hip-hop began with teenagers at a back-to-school jam in the rec room of a South Bronx apartment complex by an 18-year-old brother. By the way, I'm also sure he had a Cadillac parked outside. He noticed the energy on the dance floor when he switched between two turntables, extending the beats, repeating the breaks, and never losing the rhythms. And that was the birth of hip-hop. And from that moment, it took off.
For more on how Cadillac is celebrating hip-hop's 50th, visit Cadillac.com/audacity.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, could potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you, but it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hey there, Los Angeles. This is James Lucky Jr., publisher and editor of Los Angeles News Observer. Are you hungry for news that matters to you in the African-American communities of Los Angeles? Well, buckle up, because we got the scoop you've been craving. Stay in the know and never miss a beat with our free weekly publications conveniently available near you. Or hop on the digital wave and become an exclusive subscriber at OGNSC.com. Don't forget to join the party on Instagram and Twitter at OGNSCINC for behind-the-scenes access and sizzling updates. No more FOMO. Let's stay informed, connected, and empowered together.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Is this tree good for climbing? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin ultra strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, yeah, drop it. Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
Made fresh daily in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Our guest is Dr. Michael Honey. Our remaining moments with him right now. We've been talking in this hour, in case you've just tuned in, about this UAW strike, of course, and the history of U.S. labor movements, and really focusing more on the history. We spent the first hour of today's show talking a bit more about the strike in real time. You probably know by now, I keep repeating that President Joe Biden historically will be on the picket line tomorrow. Of course, we'll talk about that in the first hour of tomorrow's program. Pretty easy to know where we're going tomorrow, since the president will be making this historic move to join a picket line with these workers. So that'll be, I'm sure, at the top of our docket tomorrow. But I wanted to spend some time in this hour with Dr. Honey, given that he's a distinguished scholar in African American and labor history, talking just about the history of the labor movement and certainly the African American connection to it. One final question, maybe one or two more final questions about Dr. King here. We talked a moment ago about his journey fighting for economic justice. Those Memphis strikers, for those who don't know the story, did advance the issues that mattered to them, just as we saw the writers advance their narrative here in Hollywood last night. We will see what happens in the coming days with the UAW strike. But let me go back to King right quick in Memphis. What did ultimately happen, for those who don't recall it, and how vitally important was King's involvement, assassinated nonetheless, to the ultimate outcome?
Well, the strike had been going on for about a month and a half, I believe. It started on February 10th, and he was killed on April 4th. Mm-hmm. And when he came on March 18th, the strike was kind of flagging, and partly it was because they weren't getting national publicity. And so that's why Reverend James Lawson asked him to come to Memphis, mm-hmm. was put the spotlight on the strike. And wherever King went, the media tended to follow. And so when he came on March 18th, it was totally unprepared. He just walked into a huge gathering of people at Mason Temple and gave a brilliant speech. And he called for a general strike. And I thought, thinking back about King, that only somebody who was really in touch with unions for more than 10 years as part of his ministry, even going back to the Montgomery bus boycott, where he had strong support from unions, and pretty much everything he did after that, getting support from a lot of unions. Only somebody like that would even think to call a general strike of all the working people in Memphis in support of the Memphis sanitation strike. And so he raised things up to a whole new level when he did that. And for the civil rights movement, it was like a new moment, really, from social and civil rights to economic justice. And so I think he left that legacy very, very important. And a lot of unions and other people today support King on the April 4th as well as on January 15th to understand the legacy of that and the importance of that. And one last thing is his Jericho Road analogy is that anybody can participate in this movement to make the world a better place. I'm working a lot with Reverend James Lawson and other people in California. The Senate in California passed a resolution to teach nonviolence in K through 12 in the schools. So I don't know if you know about that, but you might want to pick up on that.
I know about it well. I was just with James Lawson the other day. As a matter of fact, you mentioned his name, James Lawson. On Friday, turned 95 years of age. And there was a huge celebration here in Los Angeles where he lives. When he left Memphis, he came to Los Angeles to be the pastor of Holman United Methodist Church. He's lived there for all these years since leaving Memphis after the assassination of Dr. King and that Memphis sanitation workers strike. To your point, he's the one that called King to ask King to come to Memphis. And that troubled him for years. For years, he was troubled by the fact that he was the guy who invited King to come to Memphis to lead the strike, and King ends up being assassinated in his then city of Memphis. But he's been here in L.A. for decades, turned 95 on Friday, so happy 95th birthday belated to Reverend Dr. James Lawson. And again, a great deal of celebration in the city. As a matter of fact, the city passed a resolution to every year name a day after him in honor of James Lawson. So it's a big deal for him last week on the occasion of his 95th birthday, since you mentioned his name. For now, we thank Dr. Michael Honey, distinguished scholar in African American and labor history, for joining us in this hour to talk about the history of the labor movement. And you take black folk out of the experiment in America, as I say all the time, and it falls flat, including King and the labor movement, but I digress for now. Dr. Honey, good to have you on. All the best to you, sir. Take care of yourself.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. Coming up in our third hour, a conversation with Academy Award winner and comedian Monique about her lawsuit against CBS and Paramount. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Ray Harris, and here's the latest from the Black Information Network.
It's been very rough, and this wind here is killing me. I mean, I think it's a 20-mile-an-hour wind.
Post-tropical cyclone Ophelia continues to weaken and move offshore after dumping heavy rain from North Carolina to New Jersey.
Thousands of homes and businesses still in the dark after winds of up to 70 miles an hour damaged power lines.
Forecasters say the system produced